Stories that made a difference.
Local reporting is the foundation of American journalism.
The lives they changed.
It's a story that drew international interest.
And the journalists that pushed for truth.
Journalists finding the story behind the story.
You're always hoping when you write a story that it will make the world a better place.
Democracies rely on a free press.
The story isn't over.
The Scripps Howard Journalism Awards starts now.
Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Christian Bryant from Scripps News, and this is a celebration of the best in American journalism and its impact on all of us. For more than 140 years, Scripps has stood as a beacon of the free press. I mean, there's a lighthouse right there in our logo. Joining me tonight are presenters David Muir, Soledad O'Brien, Jeff Bennett, and John Oliver. Together, we'll tell you about finalists and winners across a wide range of categories and topics. But tonight isn't just about journalists. It's also about the American public and the life-changing impact that independent journalism continues to have for people all across the country. Our first awards category is the bread and butter of any newsroom, breaking news. Speaking from personal experience, journalists plan ahead as best we can, but we also have to stay sharp so we can pivot at a moment's notice and cover the things we didn't see coming. Our finalists for excellence in breaking news are a massacre in Monterey Park by the Los Angeles Times on the tragic mass shooting in one Chinese community over Lunar New Year. Lookout Santa Cruz for Santa Cruz County storms from the only local news operation informing its community during ravaging floods. This year's winner for excellence in breaking news is the Associated Press for deadly Maui wildfires, reporting on the fire's devastation, which our judges called a masterclass in breaking news coverage. There's no one way to tell a story. The important thing is getting it out there, which is why the First Amendment, the freedom of speech or of the press, is so vital to what we do. To tell us more about our next category, we're honored to have David Muir from ABC News and anchor of World News Tonight.
Thank you, Christian. Without the First Amendment, none of us in journalism could do what we do. Democracies rely on a free press to hold those in power accountable and to keep citizens informed and empowered. We all know our country's founding fathers listed freedom of the press among the very first protections we hold dear in the Bill of Rights. It's with that protection that journalists can freely report the truth. We all take these responsibilities seriously. And I'm honored to recognize this year's finalists who best represent that mission. The finalists for this year's award for distinguished service to the First Amendment are Transparency Failures Sow Distrust in City Marred by Corruption by Hearst Connecticut Media Group. The reporting exposed one Connecticut city's pattern of illegally obstructing public records requests from journalists and citizens. No Responsive Records, How Vallejo Hid Killings by Police by Open Vallejo about city officials destroying evidence in multiple police killings and a non-fatal shooting. And the winner in the First Amendment category is Marion Record Raid by the Kansas City Star and Wichita Eagle. In a series of reports and editorials, the two newspapers investigated that raid of a small town paper by a local police chief. To hear the story behind this story, we take you to Marion, Kansas.
This is a town of about 2,000, and we have a circulation of about 2,000. I'm Eric Meyer. I'm editor and publisher of the Marion County Record. We've been around since the 1860s. My mother, Joanne, started working at the paper probably as soon as I was able to go to school. The world changed for us on August 11th. I happened to have been at my mother's house at the time where I was staying.
Eric Meyer?
Yeah.
We're here with the search warrant.
And there were a sheriff's deputy and a state fire inspector serving a warrant. At the same time, a group of them came to the office here, the newsroom. They took almost all of our newsroom computers. They also took our cell phones, took my laptop, took my mother's computer from her house. My mother became increasingly angry at the raid.
Don't you touch any of that stuff. This is my house.
The first thing I did was to tell them that I think you're doing something illegal.
You are violating state law.
That it was motivated possibly by animus that the chief had, that he wanted to find out what investigative material we had on him.
When I first heard that this happened, my response was, no, that can't be what happened. It was just so outrageous. You just don't hear of police raiding newsrooms, right?
We knew we had to do this story. We knew we had to get on it really quickly because this was something that we never wanted to see happen again.
The police chief was previously in Kansas City, and we wondered what his relationship was to Marion.
I was the primary police reporter, so I had developed some sources throughout the years, and your presence there pays dividends because people know you.
He was looking for who are the people who might know what the real story is about why this police chief left Kansas City.
He had an interaction with a subordinate and used some off-color language towards that person. He began to be under investigation, and rather than stick around for that investigation to play out, he just resigned and left the department.
The editorial part of this launched immediately. Dion Leffler in Wichita was closest to it in the early stages.
There are times when the paper needs to take a stand, and this I immediately saw as a moment that we needed to take a stand.
We knew we had to do an editorial, and we decided that we needed to do something even stronger than one editorial, and that's a joint editorial.
We're the only organized watchdogging of local government that there is. And without newspapers, without TV, radio, without strong journalism, those guys can do whatever they want.
I want the truth. Do you know what the truth is?
My mother was angry because it was wrong, because she was a journalist.
I called the house and got her on the line. When I talked to her, she was very upset.
You guys caused me to have another stroke. That's going to be murder.
Eric Meyer's mother, Joanne, died the next day. It was just another layer of how incredulous we were that all this was going on.
In 40 years of journalism, I have never interviewed someone and had them die before I had the story in print.
Well, they're working.
I don't care what they're
doing. You
doing.
can go on through it.
To be 98 years old and go down swinging, that's a good end for a journalist.
I am absolutely convinced that the raid caused the death of my mother.
What this story says about the power of journalism is that it's still there. We need to stand up for each other. And when you attack a small paper, you're attacking all of us.
We have to be able to go in and tell these kinds of stories and not be fearful.
It was important to us, come hell or high water, we were going to have a paper that came out that week. We weren't going to let them win. That's just not going to happen.
The stories in our next category show the true public value of journalism about the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the planet we share. The finalists for environmental reporting are the San Francisco Chronicle for firefighters are being poisoned by wildfire smoke. We're doing little to protect their health, about the hazards facing emergency responders. Uncharted Waters from the New York Times examined U.S. groundwater resources and revealed a looming crisis beneath our feet. This year's winner for excellence in environmental reporting is The Human Limit by the Washington Post, a global investigation on how climate change threatens human health. Just ahead on the Scripps Howard Journalism Awards, an Oscar winner shares a gut-wrenching account from the front lines of war. Welcome back to the Scripps Howard Journalism Awards as we spotlight the impact of the year's best reporting. You can think of journalism as data with a story. It's the personal stakes and the narrative journey that turn those data points into something that can move an audience. These next few stories make that clear. The finalists for narrative human interest storytelling are, from the Texas Tribune, she was told her twin sons wouldn't survive. Texas law made her give birth anyway. Nightmare in Mission Hill by the Boston Globe, reopening the 1989 murder case of Carol Stewart and how false accusations harmed Boston's Black community. For narrative human interest storytelling, the winner is Ukraine Kindergarten from NPR. In the words of our judges, a haunting account of the global displacement of one kindergarten class in Kharkiv after Russia's bombardment. In an era of information overload, the finalists in our next category cut through the noise by doing what great visual journalism has always done, immersing us in a story and showing us the personal stakes. Our finalists for visual human interest storytelling are The South Got Something to Say by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, a look at hip-hop music's ties to the Southern U.S. Dreams, Despair, and Death, a migrant's journey by the El Paso Times, with harrowing stories of border crossings and migrant deaths along the U.S.-Mexico border. For visual human interest, this year's winner is MSNBC for On Assignment with Richard Engel, Ukraine's Secret Resistance, which our judges felt drew the viewer into its gripping wartime story. Our next category honors in-depth TV and video coverage of an event or issue here at home or abroad. To present these finalists, we're giving the floor to Soledad O'Brien, host of Matter of Fact with Soledad O'Brien on Hearst Television.
Thank you, Christian. This year's finalists for excellence in national and international video storytelling are Victim Suspect by Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting, uncovering a shocking trend in how the criminal justice system turns on sexual assault survivors. Clarence and Ginny Thomas, Politics, Power, and the Supreme Court by Frontline, a close look into the private and public life of the conservative power couple reshaping American politics. And the winner in the national and international video storytelling category is Frontline and the Associated Press for 20 Days in Mariupol, an on-the-ground, first-hand account of Russia's invasion into eastern Ukraine. Tonight, we meet the team of journalists and filmmakers that brought viewers to the front lines of Russia's war in Ukraine. It's a story that drew international interest, an Academy Award, and newfound attention to the unmatched value and peril of conflict journalism.
"20 Days in Mariupol" tells a story of a siege of the city of Mariupol. I'm very fortunate to have a great experienced team with me. As journalists, we were trying to predict where the main strike of Russian forces will be. We didn't expect that the siege is going to be so violent, that the barrage of bombing would be so indiscriminate.
Чего расстраиваешь?
Не хочу, чтобы я умирала.
Mstislav is a really remarkable storyteller and journalist. Mstislav started to understand that this might have a story that would be beyond breaking news. Because he was starting to think about halfway through the siege about how there might be a longer form story that could be told.
When maternity hospital was hit by an airstrike, we ran there. As soon as we arrived there, I realized that we've never seen anything like that. All that just showed us how different the reality was from what Russia was claiming is happening. They were still claiming they're bombing only military targets.
By virtue of the fact that the Associated Press backed these journalists and that they stayed there, we're able to know what actually happened there.
When you have such an important material, which you know that only you have, it puts a huge responsibility on you as a journalist.
I have no illusions about what will happen to us if we are caught.
Information and an ability to get and give information is so important, vitally important for modern society, more than sometimes food.
Mstislav and the team are from Ukraine. They're Ukrainian.
Как вас зовут? Людмила. Людмила, а фамилия ваша как?
Амелькина. You see these very human moments. In part, it's because they're speaking Ukrainian, they're talking to each other, and there is a comfort.
Evangelina, 4 years old.
Names that I name in the film are unfortunately names of children and adults who lost their lives.
Ilya, 16 years old.
People want to be heard, and even in their worst moments of their lives, in a most vulnerable position. We tried to show everything without sanitizing, but we didn't know how the audience would react. And the audience reacted very well. They've connected to this tragedy.
This is Ukraine's first Oscar. It has been seen at the UN, it's been seen at the State Department. The fact that this has now been seen around the world and will be into the future is really nothing short of remarkable.
I wish I could do more, stay longer, but we need to leave.
One of the reasons why 20 Days in Mariupol as a film exists is because of that frustration and because of that sense of guilt that the whole team had when we left, that we really wanted to do more. We really want to keep telling that story. And so we did.
20 Days in Mariupol, and the winners in our previous two categories, Ukraine Kindergarten and Ukraine's Secret Resistance, capture stories of loss and resilience. These windows into wartime in Ukraine wouldn't be possible without the sacrifice of their subjects and of the storytellers who risked their lives. Last year, the Committee to Protect Journalists recorded 78 journalists killed worldwide, many of them in Gaza, Israel, and Ukraine. We remember and honor all of those journalists.
Thank you, Soledad. Coming up, journalists expose what's really going on behind the scenes at some cutting-edge prisons, at companies nationwide, and even at the Supreme Court. Welcome back to the Scripps Howard Journalism Awards. Opinions, everybody's got one, right? But opinion writing is a journalistic tradition that goes way back. In America's early days, Alexander Hamilton founded the New York Post to spread Federalist politics and oppose Thomas Jefferson. Today's journalistic code requires us to label opinion pieces to help the public distinguish it from hard news. The finalists in opinion writing are Fallout, Tracking the Global Impacts of Russia's War in Ukraine by Coda Story, and Ukrainska Pravda, Examining the War's Broader Regional Implications. Men Are Lost, Here's a Map Out of the Wilderness by the Washington Post, exploring how men are navigating a changing societal landscape. And the opinion category winner is Inside Out by the LA Times, on how one prison reform model could change lives in jails and beyond. We sat down with columnist Anita Chabrier to hear how her reporting introduced her to some unexpected people and places.
California is trying to reimagine what public safety looks like to see if we can really change people while they're in jails and in prisons. I had heard rumblings coming out of Governor Gavin Newsom's office that he was interested in the Scandinavian model.
Work that's been done in Scandinavia and elsewhere is important, and
that's sort of the heart of the Scandinavian model, is that prison can be a time to really reflect on yourself and hopefully come out better.
Covering a topic like this is a bit of a minefield. Anita was especially attuned and was able to pierce through that through her sophistication and writing ability.
The Scandinavian model is actually being used on a limited basis in a number of places in the United States. I went to a prison that they call Chester in Pennsylvania. You walk in and it looks sort of like an airport lounge. The freedom you see inside really is a critical part of the rehabilitation. I started a conversation with the guards, the corrections officers union, and they invited me to come along to Norway to see some of these prisons and how they work. It doesn't necessarily feel like a prison. The inmates just have a lot more freedom. They are in their own clothes. You see them walking around, shopping in the store. They don't really have cells. One of the things I think really struck the guards was that there was a different way to be a corrections officer. I spent a lot of time with one particular guard, Steve Durham, who everyone calls Bull, and got his take on a lot of things.
A good day for a correctional officer on their job is a day that nothing violent happens and everybody gets to go home safe. You never want to seem weak, so you don't say anything to anybody. I first met Anita in Norway, getting on a bus to go to Halden prison. We were going there more skeptical of it. And then when we got there, our views started to change a little bit. The employees there, they laughed. They hold the inmates accountable for their actions. They also are giving life lessons to the incarcerated individuals over there so that way, hopefully, they don't come back. We would love to see some of the reforms over here. If it's done appropriately, it would vastly improve our mental health status. The difference is, how do we make it out or through our career with our mental health intact?
When people set out to read stories about a topic like criminal justice reform, they might assume that it's just going to be about those inmates. What this series of stories did was show that there's more to it than that.
The Scandinavian model is just about making sure that the people coming out at least have the personal skills and the job skills to make other choices. I think that it could be a triple win for public safety, for the inmates, and for the guards.
To the untrained eye, business and financial reporting can seem a little numbers heavy, but the best journalists, like the ones we're about to introduce, know how to make sense of it all. Tonight's finalists prove that exposing abuses in the world of business can truly change lives. The finalists for excellence in business and financial reporting are Payback, Tracking the Opioid Settlement Cash by KFF Health News, exposing the widespread misuse of funds from opioid lawsuits. With Every Breath by ProPublica and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, in collaboration with Medill Investigative Lab, exploring the scandal involving contaminated sleep apnea machines. The winner in business and financial reporting is Alone and Exploited by the New York Times, exposing child migrant labor abuses in all 50 states. The judges panel called the series a vital, well-told story for our time. Up next on the Scripps Howard Journalism Awards, a look at innovative approaches across the industry. Welcome back to the Scripps Howard Journalism Awards, celebrating reporting that's both impactful and innovative. Some stories can't be told through traditional means. That's why reporters turn to data journalism, open source intelligence, and a growing range of digital tools to get to the heart of stories in ways we've never seen before. And the finalists in our innovation category are 3D analyses of violence in the West Bank from the Washington Post, a reconstruction of fatal incidents of Israeli troops opening fire on civilians. Roots of an Outbreak by ProPublica, demonstrating how deforestation can unleash the next pandemic. The winner for excellence in innovation is ProPublica and the Desert Sun for Thirsty Valley, uncovering how a select few people are using most of California's precious water supply. The judges praised the reporting for its creativity in exposing this underreported problem. The earliest reporters' tools were pen, paper, and typewriters. That last one was before my time, but things have come a long way since then. The finalists for excellence in multimedia journalism are Adrift from the Associated Press, retracing the fatal journey of African migrants bound for Europe whose boat washed up in the Caribbean. The Boston Globe for Nightmare in Mission Hill on new documents in the historic Carol Stewart murder case that flared racial tensions in Boston. This year's winner in multimedia journalism is Reuters for the Batlands, revealing how human incursion into bat habitats could trigger another global health crisis, hailed by judges as important science journalism at its finest. Not too long ago, audio journalism generally meant radio journalism, but today, podcasts and other forms of digital audio have captured listeners and revolutionized the medium. For the award for audio storytelling, the finalists are The Turning, Room of Mirrors by Rococo Punch and iHeart Podcasts on the abusive atmosphere many competitive ballet dancers face. The Retrievals by Serial Productions and the New York Times, examining how the medical field often mistreats women in pain. And the winner for audio storytelling is Murder in Boston by the Boston Globe with HBO Documentary Films. The audio piece on the decades-old murder of Carol Stewart and the black men unfairly targeted for the crime. I've always been fascinated by the work of investigative journalists and their ability to uncover truths that some may have wanted to keep hidden. Here to present our next category is PBS NewsHour co-host Jeff Bennett.
Thank you, Christian. Investigative journalists bring a particular doggedness to their reporting. They dig deeper, do intensive research, and often uncover unexpected details through their tireless dedication to finding the story behind the story. Let's meet some of the nation's best reporters demonstrating excellence in national and international investigative reporting. The finalists are Alone and Exploited by the New York Times, revealing companies large and small were violating child labor laws with underage migrant workers. The Musk Industrial Complex from Reuters on troubling allegations within the empire of businessman Elon Musk. The winner for national and international investigative reporting is Friends of the Court by ProPublica, an expose of the close ties between some Supreme Court justices and influential political donors. This series made national news and changed the court itself. Let's hear from these intrepid reporters.
Really, the court was kind of a unique vacuum of accountability and oversight within the federal government.
The justices, when they travel outside of Washington, sometimes get security from the U.S. Marshals Service. As a result of that, you can get some public records from the marshals.
Buried in page 16,000 or something, there was a mention of a private jet.
Our colleague from our research team found a Facebook page. This website had a post that said something like, "We were honored to receive a visit at New Haven Airport by Justice Thomas." The only plane that had taken that trip from DC to New Haven on that day was Harlan Crow's plane. Harlan Crow's a billionaire political donor.
Maybe it was the sort of thing that only you would do if you were in the habit of doing this. And that's really when we decided to try to figure out if this was a pattern. We made, I think, thousands of calls over the course of this reporting, conducted hundreds of interviews.
Really, the key to the reporting was talking to service workers who had little bits of what became the story.
We found out eventually that Clarence Thomas had virtually every year for over 2 decades been accepting luxury trips from Harlan Crow and not telling the public about it.
One of the vacations was a trip several years ago where Harlan Crow dispatched his private jet to pick up Justice Thomas, flew him across the world to Indonesia where Crow's super yacht was waiting for them.
For one trip that Thomas took to New Zealand, a yacht worker sent us a photo of Thomas's memoir.
And Justice Thomas had signed, "Thanks so much for all your work on our New Zealand vacation." After our first story was published, we got a rush of tips.
Harlan Crow had actually paid Thomas money in a real estate deal that Thomas didn't disclose to purchase Thomas's mom's house.
Harlan Crow had paid around $100,000 of private school tuition for Justice Thomas's relative who he was raising essentially as an adopted son.
Experts told us that all of this had to be public by federal law, but Thomas didn't disclose any of it.
We had multiple judges tell us that they would not let anyone even buy them lunch, let alone take them on a $1 million vacation or pay private school tuition for their child.
The underlying conduct itself is mind-boggling. The complete lack of transparency is something that is extremely disturbing.
It became very important to have documentary evidence. We got pictures, for example, of Justice Alito on this luxury Alaska fishing trip with a hedge fund billionaire who had cases at the Supreme Court.
We also started to try to get at other ethical questions, such as Clarence Thomas going secretly to the Koch political network, going to their events for high-dollar donors. And the Koch network brings major cases to the Supreme Court.
These stories really struck a chord in a way that most of the work I've done hasn't. The Supreme Court last year adopted a code of conduct for the first time in its history. They almost never even comment in response to stories, let alone actually take any kind of substantive action.
It was an extraordinary moment to see one of the most vaunted and also slow-moving institutions in America, frankly, do something it had never done before.
I think there's not a chance in the world that the Supreme Court would have adopted the ethics code if not for the courageous and tenacious reporting of ProPublica.
I think at a very basic level, investigative journalism is about uncovering secret information that's, important for the public to know.
You're always hoping when you write a story that it won't just go into the waste paper bin, that it will make the world a better place or make the government function better. Sometimes it does, and that's really the best part of the job, I think.
Still to come, incredible stories from local reporters while we hear from one of their biggest fans, John Oliver. Welcome back to the Scripps Howard Journalism Awards. We want to take some time now to focus on journalists who focus on issues in their own backyard. Our next category honors journalists who dig for the truth closer to home. Our local and regional investigative reporting finalists are Missing in Chicago by City Bureau and Invisible Institute, exposing police misconduct in missing persons cases. The Miami Herald with The Foreclosure Franchise, on how one lawyer convinced Florida cities to seek profits from home foreclosures in minority neighborhoods. And the winner for local and regional investigative reporting is Chaos in Ohio's Youth Lockups by the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Columbus Dispatch, Akron Beacon Journal, and Canton Repository, uncovering a justice system plagued by dysfunction. Our next presenter recently confessed to committing sporadic acts of journalism. John Oliver and his show Last Week Tonight on HBO dives deep into major stories and important issues in a way that's always funny, often bizarre, and sometimes policy-changing. The show also consistently gives a national platform to incredible local journalism. To present our next category, here's John Oliver.
Hi there, thanks Christian, and hello to everyone. I'm John Oliver, and look, local reporting is the foundation of American journalism. We rely on it constantly here at this show. By building trust with their viewers, local reporters have the ability to find and tell stories that no one else can. All of that is clear to see with the stories in our next category. I'm happy to say that the finalists for excellence in local video storytelling are Beloved by New York Amsterdam News, a story of transformation and redemption for a man showing his community an alternative to gun violence. Undetermined by KUSA TV Denver, a year-long investigation into the deaths of people in law enforcement custody that changed how police are trained across Colorado. This year's winner for excellence in local video storytelling is Care 11 Investigates Broken Promises by Care TV Minneapolis, which dug into allegations of widespread misdiagnoses within the Veterans Affairs healthcare system. To hear more about how this tenacious reporting changed the lives of so many veterans, we head now to Minneapolis.
This investigation was really about a systemic pattern of our nation's veterans being misdiagnosed and denied access to medical care and benefits that they earned when they put on our nation's uniform. The common denominator that our investigation discovered was veterans had seen a single doctor in the neurology department in the Tomo, Wisconsin VA hospital.
It's a story we heard from veteran.
Put it on the report that I didn't even have MS.
After veteran who saw Dr. Mary Jo Lanska.
What'd she
say about your Parkinson's?
I didn't have any Parkinson's.
This story started with one veteran reaching out and asking for help.
My name is Brandon Winishek. I'm a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation here in Wisconsin. Within the Ho-Chunk Nation, our veterans, they're very well respected, and especially combat veterans. I served in the United States Marine Corps from 2001 to 2005. I deployed to Ramadi, Iraq in March of 2004. And about a third of the battalion was either killed or injured in this 7-month deployment.
He was having physical symptoms like dizziness, and they'd been going on since he got back home from Iraq. He'd survived multiple IED blasts.
We had a mission, and when we came home, the VA had a mission. I did my part. All I needed was the aftercare that was promised to me. Every time I would ask for help, it would make it to Lanska's desk, and she would say, Brandon, no, I told you, you're fine. You don't have a traumatic brain injury. Years go by, just years of complaining.
It's over a 2-year span, so we profiled 8 or 9 different veterans, maybe even more. The one thing I kept hearing, the one thing in common was Dr. Lanska. All of them kept saying that they were misdiagnosed.
A big part of investigative journalism is almost like putting together a puzzle. It's gathering all the pieces and trying to put them together to make sense of all these disparate parts.
As we thought about it, we thought not only is this a good story, but this is an important story because nobody else is going to do it.
We got the senators involved, we have congressmen involved, we have the Secretary of Veterans Affairs involved. It's gone all the way to the top.
The Department of Veterans Affairs had finally seen enough.
Dr. Lanska no longer works at VA.
Someone was finally listening to what they'd been saying for years, and this resulted in roughly 650 veterans being recalled for new neurological testing. Some of them got more than a decade of back benefits, hundreds of thousands of dollars that they had been owed and denied.
We've changed the way that the VA handles traumatic brain injury with the help of Carrie Levin, with the help of AJ. Look at what we've done so far.
We like to say our reporting changes laws and changes lives. In this case, I think it really did change the lives of 600-some veterans.
You don't get in this job for the money. You get in the job to make a difference. And when a story that you were a part of comes out like this and make a big impact in society, you really feel good about it.
This investigation took several years, but we kept going, we kept reporting, we kept digging, and ultimately we were able to tell stories that could not be ignored all the way up through the halls of power in Washington.
Still to come, we reveal the winner of the night's highest honor, the Scripps Howard Impact Award. Welcome back to the Scripps Howard Journalism Awards. Tonight, we've seen the best of American reporting and its impacts on people across the nation. Our finalists and winners have shown us the value of the First Amendment, the bravery of conflict reporting, the power of the free press, and the purpose of local journalism. But only one story, selected from all the stories featured tonight, is the winner of our Impact Award, which is given to the story that made the greatest difference with its reporting. Past Impact Award winners include groundbreaking reporting that propelled the Me Too movement, exposed police misconduct and racial injustice, and revealed the power of big money threatening democracy. The winner of the 2024 Impact Award is Alone and Exploited by the New York Times. We met with journalist Hannah Dreyer to hear how her reporting impacted government agencies, corporations, and the lives of vulnerable migrant children whose voices she sought to amplify. Let's hear from our Impact Award winner.
I had been covering immigration for a long time, and I knew that I would occasionally come across children who were here without their parents and were working. And I started to wonder if this was a larger phenomenon. I initially thought I might find children working restaurant jobs or working in agriculture. I had no idea that they were working these kinds of dangerous, grueling, overnight jobs.
I found these little girls who were making cereal every night. Just the idea that they're just sitting in class during the day and then having to get to these factories at night.
A lot of this reporting was done in factory parking lots. I would go to the midnight shift change or the 5 a.m. shift change. A lot of the children were scared. They didn't know if I was law enforcement. They didn't know if they would get in trouble for talking with me. And in some cases, they were scared of their American sponsors. Sometimes the people they were living with were more like traffickers.
I think Hannah really puts people at the center of her work. She is always thinking about how to tell the stories with empathy and sensitivity.
We found children working these dangerous jobs in all 50 states. We found children who were making Cheerios, Gerber baby food. They're working on car parts for Ford and GM. I talked to children who were working on rooftops, children who were working in slaughterhouses. I talked to one child, Marcos, who was working the night shift as a middle schooler at a Purdue slaughterhouse. And one night he was cleaning a deboning machine. Somebody else in the factory didn't see him and turned it on and shredded his arm down to the bone. I talked to another child who had been working in roofing and fell 3 stories. He now is severely brain damaged.
I was shocked but not maybe surprised by how many kids were dying. I thought that was such a moral wrong being done to these children that it kind of drove a lot of our thinking about the story.
The New York Times published a stunning expose shining light.
The reporting that Hannah provided was such a critical tool. It is far too easy for people's eyes to glaze over when they hear abstract statistics. It is less easy for them to look away when they hear names.
I was surprised to see how quickly there was reaction from the government, from companies.
The first story ran on a Saturday, and on Monday, the Biden administration launched a task force specifically to take on migrant child labor. The Department of Labor started going out and looking for these kids and imposing massive fines. Health and Human Services started really putting resources toward helping these children.
The series changed the accountability for companies due to increased enforcement from the administration side, as well as increased consumer pressure, but also, and importantly, increased pressure internally to companies. And that's been very, very crucial and directly came out of Hannah's reporting.
In Congress, we saw more than 15 bill introductions.
Providing the hard, concrete facts that we need to drive the necessary policy change is essential.
Help really poured in for every child that we talked about in this reporting. Some of them received tens of thousands of dollars from readers through GoFundMe campaigns. I've never seen anything like this kind of reaction to anything I've written. It really affirmed my faith in readers and showed me that people do care. We've seen huge positive changes for children in this country, but a lot of migrant children are still crossing the border. So this is an ongoing issue. The story isn't over.
Congratulations to all of tonight's finalists and winners. A huge thank you to our presenters and to you at home for joining us. For Scripps News, I'm Christian Bryant, and this has been the Scripps Howard Journalism Awards.
I think it takes a really thick skin these days to be a reporter and a lot of clarity on why you're doing it, which is always to tell the truth.
The very best journalists have a compassion and an ability to communicate and talk with people.
I don't think you could have a democracy without freedom of the press. Democracy means people direct the government, and that's impossible to do if they don't know what the government's doing.
You can't expect the networks or the New York Times to report on every little story, and very often the little stories are not so little.
It's so important to bring young journalists into this career, for them to see people who look like them in these roles.
Journalism isn't dead. We just need to remember to do our jobs.